Oh my God, look at it's Dewey Freeman and Mark Sylvester. It's the Elder
Good
Show.
morning, brother. And Merry Christmas.
Merry, 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 merry. Makes me think about traditions. And we're recording the day after Christmas, 2021. Not sure when this is being listened to. But driving to traditional dinner with the in-laws, there was nobody out. Nobody.
Really?
All and I just down at the bottom of the hill for a quarter of a mile. That's the lower village of Montecito, and there's a dozen restaurants, all empty. All the lights were on and all the people were gone. And I was thrilled because that meant those employees were getting to have Christmas with their family. And if people didn't get to go out to eat tough noogies, I was happy that the employees got to be at home.
Absolutely.
But there was no one out. And that's so rare. I mean, even when we had the debris flow 3 years ago and we were out, there were still people walking, or you would still see, but it feels like it's the one time of year where everybody hits the pause button.
What happened? What do you think causes people to hit that pause button? What's behind that, do you think?
Gosh, I think there's a lot of answers to that. And when and this gets to what I want to talk about today, about traditions.
Okay.
And it's the tradition we've had, and it's everybody's traditions are different. The Jewish tradition is Hanukkah, and African tradition is Kwanzaa. I mean, there's so many of them now, right. But the one I grew up with was Christmas. And in my work life as an adult, it was, that winter break, right. That went from a couple days before Christmas to a couple days after the New Year. And there were years when it was awesome to get to take the 2 weeks off, and you didn't. There was no punitive, nothing punitive, like you didn't come back to a mountain of work. It's like, nope, took the time off.
Right, because everybody else did too.
Because everybody else did too. Exactly. And there's a collective permission to that, which I really enjoy. I was thinking about that. There's nothing to do today except laugh, be with family, and just enjoy. Don't add any stress of, well, we're late, or we did, or there's all that shit that happens. But it's like, no, this only gets to happen once a year. Lean into it, and just don't. It's about being present, which we've talked a lot about.
Right.
But if I'm projecting for, okay, well, because we were running a little late because other things needed to be done, phone calls and that kind of stuff. But it's like being present is, let me enjoy this exact minute right now and not think about the future minutes.
Well, and it feels like, at least on many levels, well, first of all, I like what you said about that there are many possible traditions, whether it be Hanukkah or Christmas or many other traditions. One is, part of what I think of is Joseph Campbell, who he speaks about the power of myth, and the one is that many myths or mythologies are traditions. And two is that pretty much every culture that he studied there's always a tradition around this time of year.
Oh.
Of the winter solstice, of of the beginning, especially in the northern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere is always obviously flipped with winter, summer, but the tradition of stopping, pausing, and the tradition that this is the time of year that germination into the upcoming season actually begins taking place.
Because spring comes out of this.
Right. And even seeds in the ground from whatever, like our property is surrounded by Douglas fir, or I don't know, we probably have 100 Douglas fir trees on our property. But the seeds from these trees that have been falling, or that the squirrels have taken down and helped plant, now is when they begin to germinate. They don't start moving, growing, coming out of the ground until there's warmth. But now is the beginning of the germination of seeds. And so, so the idea of having a tradition where we pause, where all of us can stop, where all of us can maybe go out and drive down the road if we are driving on Christmas and there's very little traffic, there's very little movement other than people going to other people's houses. But the tradition of stopping and pausing and allowing the new beginning is a pretty big deal to me.
What I love about our conversations is that we both take these singular ideas and come at them from completely different points of view. And
Absolutely.
I want to dig deep on that. And then I also want to park for a little later the idea of creating tradition. We are of an age where we have gone through several meaningful relationships in life, and the people that are listening may be in their first meaningful relationship or on their fourth. Not to be too specific.
Who are you talking about, Mark?
Yeah. And I have my camera turned off, so I'm not looking at me. What's interesting about tradition in that sense, and we'll come back to this, is I think we crave tradition, we crave routine, we crave ritual. And when a relationship ceases, all of the tradition and ritual related to that relationship go as well, typically, which can be either sad, you miss that thing, or an opportunity to start new traditions and to give yourself permission to say, this is one in a row of our new tradition of watching a movie on Christmas Eve, which we did this year, which we've never done. We usually, there's so many things to do to get ready because we have family and this and that, and you want to clean the house and cook all that. And we just look at each other and says, let's just have our nice meal and let's just watch a movie together. And then we'll do all the other stuff. Never done that. But you know what? I can't wait to next year to say, remember this, our new tradition.
Right, exactly. So one of the things that, well, as you're speaking, when certain relationships end and we're grieving the loss of those relationships, one of the pieces that's really important is to grieve the loss of the traditions that were in that relationship. And a lot of people don't even think about that. The other piece, which as you're talking, which makes relationships, or an aspect of what makes relationships rich, is for there to be a number of traditions which are incorporated into that relationship and are part of that relationship that only the people in that relationship know what they are.
Right.
And even during my relationship, it's like in my world, the tradition of doing these shows every Saturday morning it's like it's built in. And it's a part of what I look forward to. And it's the same way with Kimberly. It's like we have certain traditions even on a daily basis. It's like literally every evening. And I mean, we probably miss 2 days a month because one of us is maybe gone or something. That we have a little tradition every evening of coming together, either sitting outside in the summer, sitting by the fire in the winter, and connecting, chatting, going over our days, as well as traditions for some bigger pieces of our lives, like this holiday season of the traditions that we have. So one thing I wonder about is, for the people who are listening, is do you have traditions? And part of the reason I ask that is because Kimberly and I talk about the difference between society and culture often. And society does not have traditions or rituals as collectively. And one of the things that defines culture, both in a bigger, larger community or culture of a relationship, is a series of traditions that create depth in that relationship and create a bonding in that relationship.
So the thing I was thinking about is this ongoing visualization of what builds intimacy, and it's that another brick in the wall. It's another opportunity where we and as soon as you said that, I thought of shared experience. So tradition is shared experience amongst
Absolutely.
A group of people. It could be 2,200. It could be whatever it is, but it's that shared experience. Do you remember that time when we did that thing and we had that deal? And we can all remember that because there was a bonding around that, right? We bonded. That was
Right.
part of what this is. And part of your evening tradition is you've created, your relationship creates an opening for the two of you to come together on, could be the mundane, could be, depending on how the spirit moves, could be something super heavy that was some realization that day that you knew you were going to get to talk about that night. But that's another brick in one of the wall. The wall
Right.
somehow is the
The
wrong
foundation.
metaphor. Well, how about a foundation? I like that.
Yeah.
Oh, foundation's better. But I guess that's what it is. It's the shared memory, because we come together to do this thing together, and it's going to be fun, or whatever it's going to be. Whatever that tradition of a funeral is not fun, but it is a tradition that we have to come together when someone passes, right?
Well, and it's incredibly important because even the tiny traditions create a level of meaning.
Mm.
And I want to talk about the funeral piece here in a second, because that's a big deal. But like during the day, as I do my work, or I'm working with horses, or I'm meeting with people, there are things that hit me during the day. There'll be moments and it'll be like, I earmark them to go, oh, I want to share this with Kimberly tonight. I want to make sure. And there, I mean, some days there's 2 or 3 of those. Some days there's not any of those. And it's more of a general piece. But
we call those, by the way, just if this helps, we call them favorite frames.
ooh,
And imagine that you had a little camera and you took a picture of that thing. And at the end of the day, you have these favorite frames that you share together.
mhm.
And the act of actually visualizing the thing you want to remember as an instant Polaroid picture, for those,
Right on.
Google it, you guys, you'll figure out what the hell we're talking about. We used to have these things where we printed photographs on paper. But if you did that, I know for me, it helps. I want a memorial, like, boom, that thing that just happened, take just a second, freeze frame it, so that, and so at the end of any group gathering that Kimberly and I have, we always end with what she lovingly calls it favorite frames. And we just go around and say, what's your favorite frame of this thing we just did?
Right.
But it just gives us a context to do that. But so keep
I
going.
love that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna borrow that.
There you
If
go.
that-
It's
may I?
freely given.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, the piece of when you mentioned a funeral as a tradition, and I mean, one thing that came to mind, and I just want to state this, is that Desmond Tutu has died.
Yeah. He died within the last 24 hours.
Yeah, in the last 24 hours. And if we did not have a tradition of honoring someone's life, which is, in my view, what a funeral is,
Yes.
all that a person like Desmond Tutu brought to this world would just sort of melt away without being held, without being noticed, and without the possibility of carrying on that tradition. And so one of the pieces that I wonder about and I look at is how are traditions carried on, and what does that do for us when we carry a tradition on?
I immediately am thinking that it keeps the memory of in this case of a person. Remember, Desmond used to always do this. Like when he gathered, he would always, I'm making this up, he would always start with a poem. Let's say that was his fun thing. It's like whenever he met us, he always had a short little poem that he kind of was in his mind. It was rattling around, and he started with a poem. So in memory of him, and to keep that tradition going, I'd like to read a poem.
Exactly.
That would, right. And that's my kind of the point I was saying, is the transient nature of tradition as it relates to interpersonal tradition, but that to give yourself permission to start new ones. But also, now that I'm thinking about that, is there a life cycle to tradition? Well, yes, I think there is. But when do we know, like, that's the end of that one? I need to start a new one with this new person or with this new group of people.
Well, 2 things come to mind. Is one is that many traditions outlive the people who practice that tradition. And what I mean by that is that many traditions are, some of the bigger traditions are thousands of years old.
Right.
And
My point. Yeah. Yeah.
and so that those traditions can be I mean, literally carry the energy of those who came before us into our lives. Which, if we stop and think about that, when I stop and think about that, that's a pretty big deal. The life cycle of a tradition, and I'm just thinking out loud here, but the life cycle of a tradition, or a tradition waning or ending, probably needs to end when we no longer want to carry the energy of the past with us.
So let me ask a bit of a clarifying question, because I think there are some words that are similar to this that might help us understand it. So there's rituals, and there's routines, and there's traditions. So I think there's a higher meaning to tradition that transcends rituals and routines.
Say a little bit more about that.
I'm just thinking about just because you do something all of the every time, you do it routinely.
Sort of ritualistic, yeah.
Okay. And ritualistic might be the for a while there, the 20-second washing of the hand ritual, right? That was a ritual that had meaning. So it's like a routine could just be a mundane thing that you do every day. It's routinely done to do that. That doesn't have any deeper meaning than that, possibly. And ritual has meaning attached to something you do on a regular basis. There's religious rituals, there's cultural, there's rituals. So tradition might have rituals attached to it, but tradition, I think tradition has, now I'm completely contradicting myself. I think tradition, here we go, has the promise of longevity.
Ooh. Okay.
This might be the first time we did a thing collectively. So think about, you were saying before we got on the air that your next door neighbors have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they're building family tradition now, that those kids, when they're 30 and 50, will say, when we were 3 and 5, this is what our parents did, and that's our tradition. So the longevity. So did that family tradition of however they did it, probably the mom brought the tradition of how she enjoyed Christmas, and the dad brought the tradition of how he enjoyed. So then there's a combined tradition there. That becomes the shared tradition. Now, as children enter into the family, that adds more, because now that you do things different. So I think it's the promise of longevity, that we know that we're imprinting a thing you'll look back on. You don't, and it's possible you don't know it at the time that you're starting a tradition, because that might kind of fuck it up.
It's like, okay, we're going to have this as a tradition,
right? I like that sentence though, the promise of longevity.
I love that.
Yeah, that's a book. Let's write a book called The Promise of Longevity.
Okay, we'll do that. Maybe that should be the name of our book that we're putting together. The Promise of Longevity by the Elders.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, that's our show.
Well, what I'm your statement about my neighbors and the 3 and 5-year-old really hit me. It's like there's like the 3 and 5-year-old, especially the 3-year-old, the little guy, probably won't cognitively remember the tradition from yesterday. I mean, just brain wise, neural system wise, he probably won't remember that. He might remember snippets of it. The 5-year-old will probably remember more. What is striking me is that a true, and I'm brainstorming with this, is that a true tradition is something that we, one, experience and that we hold, for lack of better words, in our bones. That would, and that's the difference between a tradition and a habit, or a tradition and a ritual. Like a ritual, it's like, yeah, we might need to wash our hands. A ritual might be that, you know, we feed our horses every day in a certain way, or those kinds of things, or ritual
is ritual something that's what's crossing my mind is ritual is externally generated. We always do this thing. Our people always do the ritual of, you know, the whatever that ritual is, we do collectively. External motivation, we've always done it this way. That's the ritual. Shut up, kid. This is what we do. This is our people do this. This is the ritual. Where tradition is in the ones that I'm thinking about are the ones that we've opted into or we have created, and they're internally generated because they're the thing that binds us to another human or a group of humans. I'm specifically thinking about that because it is the holiday season. I'm thinking of the traditions nested within traditions. We always have this particular, I'm a chef, right? So we always have this particular food, and as I was getting ready this last week to prepare meals for the families, when I did this for Thanksgiving, I know what everybody wants to eat. There's a collective tradition around the food we eat at Thanksgiving. Exactly. However, Christmas is the polar opposite of that because every family had their own tradition. Grandma always brought macaroni and cheese, or mom made a mince pie, or there was always the smell of prime. What every family is different. The chances are those were passed down and became sense memories for people, but they're very personal. There isn't a ritual that you have to eat this thing. Other than possibly in religious traditions where there's a ritual around food, but that's a ritual, not a tradition. Am I on the right path, Tom?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I mean, what's striking me with this is like that felt sense of if something doesn't happen, if we don't have that mince pie, or we don't have that whatever that's a tradition, we end up feeling we miss it from the inside out.
Yeah.
It feels like something is missing.
Yeah. And my daughter has to have beef ribs and macaroni and cheese on her birthday, because in one birthday when she's growing up that I don't remember, but she clearly remembers, she has a deep felt sense of happiness around that. And every year, what would you like for your birthday? You know what I want, Dad. And one year I made lobster mac. He goes, why did you have to ruin my tradition? And that was the why did you have to chef it up? You know, it's no, don't. It's like, don't mess with my thing. Right? That tradition has, and here's where maybe traditions collide, right? In new relationships. Well, our tradition is for years, you didn't decorate the tree until Christmas Eve. Right? That was a thing. You didn't decorate the tree until Christmas Eve. That was our tradition. So imagine the person who was raised like that, and I'm sure that's still the case.
Many people.
Right? That your wife or your husband wants to surprise you and decorates the tree.
Right
You're
after
like, what
Thanksgiving, and
the
you're going, what?
what the fuck? What did you just do? So this idea of tradition, and I like the felt sense. We've talked about that a few times now, those two words together. The felt sense. Oh, well, here it is, I think. I think traditions are the connective thread in our culture.
When some people speak about it, that's actually the definition of culture.
Oh, so I walked backwards into that.
You walked backwards into that, and it was beautiful. That the difference between culture and society is the cultures have traditions, and the cultures have collective traditions that are at the foundation of the culture and the felt sense of that culture. And one of the ways that, and I don't know that I really want to go down this road today, but one of the ways to to quote conquer, if one group of people are going to conquer another group of people or colonize another group of people, the one way to do that is that you take away their traditions. And part of what all of that makes me wonder is, do we have, as beings, as humans, do we have an archetypal tradition in any way? And what I mean by that is, as human living beings, do we have an inner sense or a felt sense or an archetypal sense of that we do celebrate the beginning, the shift, light coming back, the days getting longer, do we have that inside of us? And as individuals, but also as a culture, and what traditions do we put together that pull us together? And what happens when we lose those traditions?
The things that you're talking about, that in the how we respond to the natural world as animals in the natural world, I think that's one part of it. So it's responding to the light, the respond, all of those things that you talked about. Those are DNA level responses, right? Patterned responses over millions of years in some cases. Like, oh, I hear a sound. Oh, that's a patterned response, right? That's from my DNA, that my body's going to protect me, even if my conscious doesn't know what the fuck's going on, because I'm not paying attention. My subconscious is dialed. There's like, I think those things are different than so you have societal, you have cultural, you have this other one. This human thing we've talked about, the animal part of it. I think the deal around culture to me is always, I heard someone talk about, they said language is at the heart of our culture. Without language, you don't have a culture. And it's the language, it's the thing that binds it, because it allows us to communicate. We've talked about culture and communication, right? If you don't have a language, so you do sign, you grunt, you sign, you paint, you do something to communicate, and that in fact is the culture. And the way you break into, here we go, with the way you break into a group is, first off is, I don't know goddamn language, what are these guys talking about? Get in with a bunch of journeyman masons, or journeyman of anything. And like, they're talking, you're like, I have no idea what they're saying, right? Because I'm not in that culture, right? Because I don't understand the language, right? So I think there's a language that accompanies the tradition, which is to the cultural part. And as soon as so park that for just a second, because as soon as you say society, I'm a big fan of historical fiction. And when I think of society, I'm just finished binging John Adams, and I'm listening to Walter Isaacson's biography of Benjamin Franklin. And I think of the society events where they all got together, at the big balls and those kinds of things. But there was a shared sense of being there, but that wasn't a tradition for them. It was society. It's almost like emotion is society is devoid of emotion. Right? Am I right? Good. So I've got the right picture.
Yeah, exactly. And what sending all kinds of energy through me here.
Nice.
It's like, yes, the society, it's like you walk in and you do the right thing because someone told you to do the right thing. You put your fork.
So that's a ritual.
Right. And I don't even know. You probably know. You put 2 forks on the left and a knife and 2 spoons on the right, or whatever you do.
You always work from the outside in. You know that, right?
No.
When you show up, and if there's 14 pieces of silverware, you start at the outside and you work in.
Well, I will make a note of that because I just learned that.
Yeah,
but
the oyster fork will be on the farthest to the left, and it'll probably be the first thing put on the plate. Use the first tool with the first thing, and then someone will take that away, and then the next tool on the next thing: the salad fork, the fish fork, the pasta fork, the meat fork.
So this is really cool. Is that a tradition, or is that a ritual?
I think it's a ritual.
So going back to what you said, now I'm like spinning out here. Is a ritual a form of communication? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that in a minute.
Well, if it is, then it implies it as cultural consideration, because we've already established that the communication and culture are deeply linked. So yeah, sure. There are probably rituals embedded within those traditions.
Yes. And what I'm wondering about, because when you said, if we don't know the language, so what I'm wondering about is a ritual actually language on some level?
It could be, sure. It's a way to communicate, sure.
Yeah. So
because let's say it's washing hands before we eat. Hey, go wash your hands. But that could have been, I don't want to get our what are they called? Our sociologists who go and study those behaviors. But there was somewhere back in our prehistoric days, we cleansed our hands. Maybe at some point we decided that we were going to wash our hands. And so you can imagine the kid for the first time having this awareness of seeing all the adults before the meal, all washing their hands. And maybe even there's a ritual, I know in the Islamic tradition of before you pray, there's a cleansing of yourself before you pray. That's a ritual, right? And you observe that. So without anybody saying anything, we observe, as a young person, we observe the older person doing that. We go, okay, I guess when we all come together to pray, one of the things we do is, now they may have been told, hey, we do this and here's the why, right? Because rituals, I think, have a reason. We don't just do them willy-nilly, right? There's a reason we do this thing. There's some reason
that we do that.
Right.
So what I'm thinking is, and again, I'm brainstorming here, what I'm thinking is that ritual is a kind of a language. I have taken people into huge like show barns and, or facilities where there's maybe 80 to 100 horses, and people have really never been around horses, and you walk down the aisle and someone will say something, and or there be a certain activity going on, or a certain process going on, and all of that. And there's a lot of rituals in barns that
Oh,
people probably don't even identify as that, but there are. But I've walked in and with a friend who's like really never been around in a barn where there are a bunch of horses or a farrier or vets doing things or people getting their horses ready for this, and it's like, and people are going, what in God's, I mean, everyone was
because
speaking.
they don't know the language.
Yeah.
Even if no one was talking.
Exactly. And even if someone was talking, they knew the words, but they did not know the language.
Right. Right.
It's like they could hear the words. Everyone was in this.
I know what that word means, but not the way
here.
you strung them together. Yeah.
And, and someone's walking down and they go, I think my latigo is stretched, and this is an actual.
It's a thing.
Like, yeah, and people were going, I need a new latigo, and someone's going like, what the hell is that?
and the people whoever says that, the other people who know, if they're snooty, they look and go, oh.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, if you don't know the language, and you don't know the rituals.
Right.
Like if I went to a fancy meal, what you just explained about the forks and knives and spoons and eat from the outside in, and it's like, I get it. I
makes sense.
I could do that now, but it's like, how do we learn the language so that we can be a part of the tradition?
There you go. Oh, thank you. Say it again.
How do we learn the language so that we can be part of a tradition? And how do we, if we know the language, how do we create an opening for somebody new coming in to learn the language?
That was
that your next thought?
Yeah. So there was so much to that. How do we learn the language so we become part of a tradition? I think if we're as children and we're exposed, again, I'm thinking a lot about my grandchildren and the traditions they have, and both families have very different traditions. I was explaining last night that my son's tradition is they go to I think it's called Hogs Head Bay or Hogs Head something up north of San Francisco. It's quite a drive out to it, and it's an oyster farm, and it's been their tradition for as long as the kids have been alive to drive out there on Christmas Eve. And no, it's not oysters, excuse me, it's crabs. And they get crabs, and they get a lot of them, and the dinner is just the crabs and probably something else, but the big deal is the crabs. And so they will grow up, and that will be a thing. No matter where they end up in life, they will know that they have to go find crabs. Right. Even if it's just a crab salad, it will be evocative of that memory of that tradition. So when we say, how do we learn the language? I think there's that we're taught. Part of what you and I are doing as elders is there's a cultural aspect to this conversation of adulting, of maturing, of surviving through life. It's not a tradition, but they're learning through our language, and it's very possible people are hearing words and concepts for the very first time, and it's not tradition, but it's part of the learning. You working from the outside in on the silverware comes to mind, but parsing the sentence even further, it's how do we learn the language so we can be part of, which suggests the opt-in part of that. I want to be a part of this thing. So imagine that outsider who's a guest of someone at your dinner, and they're visiting, and you've brought them to this big prandial feast, and that person's noticing there's a language, there's there's shared memory amongst all these people, and they're laughing and it's, oh, I wasn't there. Oh yeah. And you want to have them feel included. So you just, so it's weird. Yeah, you're right. Those two guys, they used to always fight, but now they get along. And I mean, there's all that stuff you can imagine. You can see that happening, right? That person, if it's a new romantic partner who's now going to be coming into this, that's not just like, if I'm just here for dinner, hey, that's great. Had a good time. Interesting people. See ya. But I have no vested interest. But if I'm going to be a part of this family, so when I'm signing up to be with this person, getting all of this, right? And I said that specifically yesterday. I said, because we were laughing at my father-in-law is just hilariously funny, unbeknownst to him, and and that's part of the tradition. Is he's going to do stuff and you're like, you can't make this stuff up. And I said, I willingly married into this family. Right. So to your point is, so we can be part of a tradition. I want to learn the language. I want to learn the history. Please tell me the story when grandpa did that thing. And that's why you guys always have a pecan pie, because Aunt Sadie came from Texas and she used to always bring a pecan pie. It's not Christmas if there isn't a pecan pie. What do you mean it's not Christmas? Come on, I never had a pecan pie in my life. In this
Here,
family,
it's not Christmas if we don't have pecan pie.
Right. And I think it's the oral tradition, or the oral history, is how we share that and keep those things alive. So back to Desmond Tutu. Desmond would always, I'm starting a meme, people are going to think he always started every interaction with a poem, which would be a sweet thing to be remembered for. But that's, and kind of where I'm going with all of this, and maybe we start to land the plane, is because we come in and out of personal relationships. That's a part of, and even work relationships, a part of what I read in The Nation is guys struggling with the ending of a thing, and they're not to the beginning of a new thing yet. Or, I mean, and they're still struggling with the loss. There's quite a bit of that. It feels, I'm sad for those guys. It's the creating a space, which is a trigger word for us, for new traditions to emerge and to not cling to the old ones, which is antithetical to what a tradition is, right? Because it's it's the wisdom to know the difference, right? Like that was just a thing we did. It really had a time and space with that group of people, with this group of people, or with this loved one, this new person. We're going to create our own. And we've done that, right? We've said that with, hey, this will be our tradition. I've done that. Every New Year's, we're going to do this because everybody else is doing that. We're going to have our own thing. And that's a bonding agreement.
So part of what you just said is amazing. All of what you just said is amazing. We just spoke about tradition being a bonding agreement. You also spoke about when a relationship ends, which we spoke about a little bit earlier today, is that we have to grieve the loss of tradition when we lose a particular relationship. When you said a tradition is a bonding agreement, we all want to know, and we've spoken about this before, is, are we safe and where do we belong?
Right. We're social creatures.
Right. And that traditions create safety and belongingness.
Boom. Boom. Say that again. That's our
tradition creates safety and belongingness.
There you go. Dewey Freeman. Man, I love this show.
Huh? I love this show too. And where we go and how we end up where we end up. Everybody who's watching this needs to know clearly that none of this is scripted. And our tradition, you and me, is, in my world, is to be able to come in and create, listen very deeply to each other, and build on what each other is putting out in the most respectful, creative way possible.
And I couldn't have said it better. Dewey Freeman, I love you, man.
Love you.
Till we talk again.
You bet.